Much thanks to Bonnie for reading and getting through that story today. Thank you, Bonnie. Appreciate it. This, I think, is probably one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. Any of you, I'm just curious, any of you remember this story a little bit? Just raise your hand, a few of you. Anybody who it's unfamiliar, a little unfamiliar to? A couple? Yeah, okay. That's all right. Some of you in Bible study mentioned a song, like a song that you remember, which I think is before my time. I didn't learn that song, but some of you remember it. The song I know is Shadrach by I think it's called Shadrach by the Beastie Boys, which is a totally different song altogether. But it's still about three Jewish men. They're just from New York City, and they happen to like hip hop. But I digress. We're going to get to the story, and it's a fun one. But in relationship, perhaps, to the story, tomorrow, December 1st, 2025, marks the 70th anniversary of the day that Rosa Parks refused to get out of her seat on the Montgomery bus. December 1st, 1955, 70 years ago. A few of you were alive then. If you were, most of you were kind of young. A number of us were not alive, but we know the story. The following Monday, after Rosa was arrested, December 5th, began the Montgomery bus boycott in that city. Black ridership made up 75% of passengers in the city, and so for them not to pay the fare on the bus was a big deal. As part of the boycott, people arranged carpools. This was like the Montgomery Uber, And then the local government in response to this, pressured local insurance companies not to insure the vehicles being used in the carpools. And so Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian, the Southern Christian Coalition of sorts, they set up insurance policies through Lloyd's of London in the UK. Black churches throughout the country raised money to support the boycott and even gathered shoes for people in Montgomery. During that time, Martin Luther King was indicted with 88 other leaders of the boycott and carpool drivers. And rather than be arrested, they turned themselves in as an act of public protest. They were indicted on charges conspiring to interfere with a business. How about that? During the boycott, Martin Luther King Jr.'s home, along with Ralph Abernathy, another pastor in the city, were firebombed. 4 black Baptist churches were firebombed. And yet, the boycott lasted 381 days, more than a year. And finally, courts ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional. I'm glad that story was taught to me. As I noted it here, I saw my 10-year-old go like this, because she knows the story too. I'm glad she knows it as well. I bring it up today also because in today's reading, thank you, Bonnie, we encounter what I would say to be a similar type of boycott. Maybe not as numerous or lengthy, but powerful nonetheless. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Who are these guys? Well, I'll let you in, okay? They are Jewish guys brought to Babylon, ripped out of their homes in Jerusalem and brought to live. They're a part of the people in exile. Their actual Jewish names are Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But as they came into Babylon, the Babylonians gave them Babylonian nicknames of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It reminds me when I was playing in Florida a few years ago, I had a Puerto Rican teammate, and he brought some other New York Puerto Rican folks with him, his girlfriend and her girlfriend, and instead of calling me Charlie, they called me Charlito. Interestingly, Vicente across the street in the taco truck now calls me Charlito as well. So Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, a.k.a. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are living in a foreign land. Some of us, our ancestors, came here and changed the name in order to assimilate better. This is how it goes. They were actually invited into the king's court. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be in power, probably wanted to keep a little bit of an eye on the Jewish powerful and elite and political rulers who he had brought into exile. And so he calls for his people to go out and pick the best-looking ones. He says, pick the ones that are handsome and don't have any physical defect. Interesting how authoritarians want to surround themselves with only, quote, good-looking people. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had gone along with things. They hadn't caused trouble. They'd been hardworking, even supportive and helpful of the community. In chapter 2, before Bonnie's lengthy chapter 3, they, along with Daniel, help Nebuchadnezzar interpret a dream. And in doing so, they even protect Nebuchadnezzar's people in his court, whom he had threatened to execute. So these guys become servants in Nebuchadnezzar's court. They're known as wise. They help the community get on with things. They know they serve under a deranged, violent, hateful, and dangerous leader, but they still try to work for good amid it. Last week, we heard of Jeremiah's letter to the people in exile, and Jeremiah said, "Seek the welfare of the community in which you live, for in their welfare you will find your welfare." And it's almost as if maybe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego read that letter. And so they do that until they are pushed too far. Nebuchadnezzar decides to build a golden statue, said to be 60 cubits tall and 6 cubits wide. What's a cubit, right? It's about 1.5 feet. So, 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. Probably about as wide as the center aisle here, and maybe a little taller than the narthex roof. 90 feet is the distance from home plate to first base, for those of you keeping track. And supposedly this is all made out of gold. What is it about megalomaniac, violent, hateful rulers and their love affair with gold? Should be a telltale sign that the person is not to be trusted. It's almost as if stories like this keep repeating themselves. And then you get this fun description of what happens. The command is to gather all of the officials, as Bonnie said, the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all of the officials of the province. Gather all of the commanders of the military and get them in one place. And then it's declared that whenever you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the drum, and the entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. I counted as Bonnie was reading. It talks about King Nebuchadnezzar having set it up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times in the chapter. Who set up the statue? This is a test of fealty. And guess who then is gathered there among the king's court? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Only they do not obey. As much as they've went along with things, as much as they've tried to live in peace in the society, as much as they've even helped to try for good and to serve people under the rule of this terrible ruler, this has pushed them too far. And notice they haven't made a big public display of it. They've quietly refused to bow, quietly refused to bend the knee. Nebuchadnezzar isn't even aware about it until they're turned in by their neighbors. It's tattletales who go to the king and narc on them. O king, live forever. These foreigners aren't obeying your rules. It's one of the biggest bootlicker speeches in the Bible. And of course, this ruler cannot put up with any criticism of himself whatsoever. It doesn't matter that these 3 Jewish wisdom seekers and goodness preparers have gone along with things and even helped in the community. He can't take it. How do you suppose King Nebuchadnezzar would have treated news reporters if they asked him about his lies to the people? I wonder how he would have treated late-night comedians. The 3 are brought before the king, and they hold to their faith. We will not worship your gods of wealth and power and violence. You can throw us in a furnace. We believe our God is powerful enough to save and protect us. But even, this is great, but even if our God does not protect us, we would rather die than worship your gods of wealth, power, and violence. Nebuchadnezzar has the fire stoked 7 times its norm. Did you catch that? He gets the strongest men in the military to bind up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. How tight were the knots? The furnace is so hot that the guards who open the doors to put them in there are incinerated. But then when they look in the furnace, they see 3 walking around unbound. And actually not 3. Nebuchadnezzar, how many did we put in there again? Well, just 3. Well, why is it that I see 4 in there, and the 4th looks like the Son of God? When they come out, not a single hair on their head has been singed. None of the clothes have been burned up. Did you catch? They don't even smell like campfire. The story ends with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being uplifted for their faith by Nebuchadnezzar. Notice that he does not renounce the gods of wealth, power, and violence. In fact, he says anybody who threatens Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will have their houses burned and be torn limb from limb. Same guy. And yet Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego carry on in faith. And their statement has brought about freedom of religion in an exiled land. A while ago, I heard Reverend Joseph Lowry, a preacher in the Methodist Church, black preacher. He was co-founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That's what I was trying to remember earlier. Southern Christian Leadership Conference, contemporary of Martin Luther King Jr., influential figure in the civil rights movement in our country. And he was part of organizing and influential in the Montgomery bus boycott. He had a refrain that I actually looked into, and I heard him, as most preachers do, they tell the same story every now and then. And he had this refrain that I heard him talk about in a few sermons. He said he had gone to the doctor, and his son-in-law was a physician, and his son-in-law told him that his cholesterol was a little high. So he had to cut out peach cobbler and things like that. But he said he also learned that there were two kinds of cholesterol. Some of you know this. There's kind of the cholesterol that's not very good for you, that's bad, that you have to limit. And then there's like a good cholesterol that you want, actually. It kind of keeps us healthy and in shape. And he said that his good cholesterol was okay. He used that analogy to talk about bad crazy and good crazy. And I remember him talking about Rosa Parks. He said that day, December 1st, 1955, Rosa had a good crazy. He talked about people who stand up for other people when they're being persecuted as good crazy. He talked about faith in the face of injustice and hatred and idolatry and bigotry as a good crazy. He referenced the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and when asked to pledge fealty to so-called gods of nationalistic, violent, greedy, gold and wealth-obsessed rulers and ideology, they had a good crazy. And they even accepted the consequences of it, too. But when they looked in the furnace, they didn't see 1, 2, 3, but 4. And he would finish his little sermonette by saying, that same God is here today. Something crazy might still happen. One more story about another black preacher, actually. Thelma Buckner, who's a matriarch of gospel singing in the Twin Cities area. Late matriarch, died a few years back. But incidentally, our psalm today was Psalm 91. And I heard her come to Augsburg University many years ago, and she preached on Psalm 91, and she said it was her 911 psalm. It's a good one to remember, right? 911 psalm. Helped her remember what it was about. You who live in the shelter of the Most High, who abide in the shadow of the Almighty, will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust, for he will deliver you from the snare of the hunter and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. She said that whenever she was encountering trial or tribulation, she went to her 911 psalm. One of the beautiful places in Scripture where God is characterized as a mother, and a mother chicken. And talk about that, it says all of this protection. But we know sometimes it isn't true. Sometimes the consequences of the world are visited upon us. Sometimes we are not protected. But then you go to verse 15, which I believe is the true center of the psalm. It says this, when they call to me, I will answer them. I will be with them in trouble. I will be with them in trouble. That's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego relied upon. Our God can save us from the fire, but even if God doesn't, we know our God will be with us in trouble. Perhaps this story challenges us again to wonder, what gods will we follow? In the gospel reading, Jesus stands before Pilate. Jesus says, "Those who know the truth, listen to my voice." Pilate, who is a ruler, Pilate, who has to pledge fealty to the emperor, Pilate, who is involved with maintaining order, even by violence, says, "What is truth?" When the truth of love, and peace, and hope is standing right in front of him. This season is about hope and peace and joy and love. It's the one we worship coming into the world, coming into each of our lives, into our society and our community, into who we are as neighbors. And perhaps we may stand with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and continue to follow in faith. Amen.